Today I'm going to walk you through a treatment using our Arte 3 V-Soft Lift PDO lifting threads. You can see this particular case that we're performing is on the patient's neck, and this is for our Arte thread neck lift. Our vectors are marked accordingly. This patient doesn't have a whole lot of tissue, but is looking for that sharp, defined jawline. And so our medial marking points that we have here that are our distal end points are basically to that lax tissue that the patient is really wanting pulled back. In general, I like to perform these procedures starting anterior to the SCM. Some providers will start posterior to the SCM, the sternocleidomastoid, but that then requires you coming up and over quite a bulky muscle, which in my opinion makes the procedure a little bit more difficult. So therefore my entry point is generally anterior to the SCM. And then again, your termination point is going to be in the center of that tissue that you're trying to pull back. So our Arte 3 V-Soft Lift PDO threads are the strongest thread that V-Soft Lift offers. It is a 17 gauge cannula, and the way that the thread is manufactured, it is intended to be the strongest PDO thread that we have to offer. And so you have to use these with caution because a couple of different reasons. First of all, it is a 17 gauge cannula, and the thread is much thicker than a lot of the other threads that are offered, and therefore you want to make sure you're using it in an appropriate patient. Patient selection is incredibly important for these threads. The reason being, the thread itself is a lot thicker, as you can see on this particular patient. It is a lot thicker than a lot of the other threads that we offer. It is on a 17 gauge cannula, and therefore there's greater risk for thread visibility through the tissue. So we would never want to use this thread on an older patient who has really thin skin, because again, the risk is thread visibility. This particular patient, she's in her 40s. She actually has really thick, tough tissue, and so using a 17 gauge cannula was not a concern for me. But you can see here that I have placed my two vectors targeting that area, that submental area that she's really wanting pulled back. The technique is exactly the same as it is for other PDO threads. However, because it is a 17 gauge cannula, it can be a little trickier to get under the tissue. We are using an 18 gauge needle to create our pilot, and therefore your hole is technically a little bit smaller than your cannula. And so sometimes getting that cannula into your 18 gauge hole, if the hole is not stretched appropriately, can be a little tricky. And so you can see here I'm trying to sort of stretch that opening to make sure that my 17 gauge will be able to slide in there nicely. And so once you get your thread into the tissue, though, it is the same exact technique as our other threads that you are used to using. And the only other difference, which you'll see in a moment here, is there is a little plastic piece that is holding your thread in place on your cannula, and that piece needs to be removed prior to engaging the cannula. And I'll talk about that as we get there. But otherwise, there is no difference in your technique for placement into the tissue. The neck is definitely a trickier area, especially on this particular patient. She doesn't have a whole lot of tissue to grab. And so you'll see I'm generally pulling the skin tight and just sort of doing little tiny twists back and forth to get that thread into the tissue appropriately, because it's really hard to pick this tissue up because there's not a whole lot of it. The neck is a difficult area also because just look at the thickness of the skin here versus the face. So in the face, we have a lot more tissue than we do the neck. And our thread is essentially going between the tissue and your platysmal muscle. And so we don't have a whole lot of depth to rely on for proper placement to ensure that we get a nice, good lift. So you can see here my cannula, and you might think, wow, that looks pretty superficial. But again, we're really trying to get that appropriate lift, and so we want to make sure that we're not too deep. Also, take into consideration the important vascular structures we have in the neck, which are deeper, and we are obviously trying to avoid. So I've just completed local anesthesia with lidocaine, and you can see here how large this thread is, the cannula is for the thread. So trying to get into the tissue again is a little bit tricky, but once you get in, it's generally the same procedure. And you can see here, I'm just advancing my cannula. Periodically, I'm checking my depth to make sure that I like where I'm at. And then I'm hoping that you'll be able to see the tip of this the tip of the cannula. But in general, I said there is a plastic piece that is holding your thread in place. If you were to remove without removing that plastic piece, when you pull your cannula out, your thread will still be loaded on the cannula. Unfortunately, you couldn't see it very well, but I did remove that plastic piece. And now as I pull that thread out, I am engaging the thread into the tissue by exaggerating my lift. With the Arte 3 17 gauge needles, this can require a little bit of effort to engage the thread. You can really feel those cogs on the thread clicking into the tissue, and sometimes it does feel like you get stuck a little bit. And my best advice is to just keep holding your pressure, you're exaggerating your lift, and you will pull and the thread will come out. Sometimes it feels a little uncomfortable applying that much force on the thread, but these cogs are really thick, and so they can get stuck on the tissue as you remove. And so we'll get to see this last thread being engaged here. And that will be the end of our treatment for the Arte thread lift for the neck. All right, here we go. We're going to engage this thread and pull straight back, and this is the completion of our procedure.